Good evening and a warm welcome to everyone here from Talking Films Online, TFO for short. TFO was founded almost on a whim by Professor Nikhila and myself in June 2020 during the lockdown. Since then, TFO has had uninterrupted discussions on films from all over the world every Saturday at 9 p.m. on Zoom. Madhurima, can you mute everybody except me?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. It is a group of film scholars, researchers, students, teachers, and anyone passionate about cinema. It has been our practice to invite people to select and lead the discussion of the chosen film, which we watch in our own time and place. On some occasions, filmmakers, editors, and cinematographers have also joined our sessions. Aparna Sen, Girish Kasarvalli, and Adur Gopalakrishnan, to name a few. We have held film festivals such as East European, Iranian, Women's Cinema, and others. In the month of June each year, to celebrate our anniversary, we hold a smartphone short film making contest for students and a lecture series in various university departments. This month, that is in January, we have held a festival called Films on Farmers. And this Saturday's discussion on NERO'S guests is the final film of this series. We are happy to inform you that P. Sainath, on whose work the film is based, is here with us. P. Sainath is a columnist and author of the acclaimed book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought. He has written extensively on rural India. His notable interests are poverty, structural inequalities, caste discrimination, and farmers' protests. He is the winner of the prestigious Ramon Magsaysay Award as well as the PUCL Human Rights Journalism Award, among others. He is the founder of People's Archive of Rural India. Today's film, the discussion of today's film will be opened by Devparna Roy. Devparna is trained as a development and environmental sociologist at Cornell University, where she got her PhD degree, and Utah State University, from where she received a master's degree. She has conducted research on farmers' issues in Gujarat and West Bengal, such as their responses to BT cotton, farmland acquisition in Sainath, recent nationwide farmers' movement, etc. She has worked as a journalist with the Economic Times in Ahmedabad and covered the Narmada Bachao Andolan in its recent years. We welcome P. Sainath, Devparna Roy, and all the others who have logged in this evening. Over to you, Devparna.
Thank you, Geeta. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it was January 26th, the Republic Day of India. Happy Republic Day to everyone. As we celebrate the 75th Republic Day of India, as we hopefully rededicate ourselves to the task of continuing to construct a democratic republic, I think this is the right time to talk about the predicament of Indian farmers. We all have viewed the classic documentary film by Deepa Bhatia, Nero's Guest. This evening, I will provide you some background information about the Indian farmers that you may be or may not be familiar with. But before I begin talking about Indian farmers, let me thank Geeta Vishwanath for introducing me today and inviting me to give a short talk. Let me preface my talk with a disclaimer. I am just a long-time student of the history and sociology of Indian agriculture. I study the controversial situations that peasant cultivators in our country often find themselves in. Like all of you, I am still learning about the wonder that is India and the idea of India. I greatly appreciate you all for taking the time to listen to me this evening. I will begin with a couple of quotes by individuals whom many of us deeply respect and find inspiring. I am going to present the grim reality that many small farmers in India face today. I may have time to tell you about my proposed solution to this problem. Perhaps my solution is utopian. However, let us remember that Mahatma Gandhi said it may be taunted with the retort that this is all utopian and therefore not worth a single thought. Let India live for the true picture, though never realizable in its completeness. We must have a proper picture of what we want before we can have something approaching it. End of quote. I hope that today's talk helps us all form a picture of what we really want for India in the coming decades, especially for her farmers. Second, I will share a quote from the famed American writer and champion of farmers' rights, Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry has said, "We don't have a right to ask whether we are going to succeed or not. The only question we have a right to ask is, what is the right thing to do? What does this earth require of us if we are going to continue living on it?" I hope that today's talk will help us get a sense of what is the right thing for India and Indian farmers to do if we are going to continue living on our corner of this earth for a long, long time. To better understand the situation of today's farmers in India, it may be useful to talk about two contrasting ideologies of economic development, Nehruvian and Gandhian, which struggled to shape the nation's futures in the first few years after India's independence in 1947. As Professor P. Karan notes in the Geographical Review, the Nehruvians or the modernizers representing the aspirations of India's urban elite easily prevailed over the Gandhians, signaling the launch of massive state-sponsored development of India's natural resources to encourage industrial growth. Calling dams and power stations the temples of modern India, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru asked the Adivasis or indigenous peoples and farmers to sacrifice their well being in the larger national interest. Writing some 50 years later in 1995, the ecologist Madhav Gadgil and the historian and sociologist Ramachandra Guha emphasized that this policy of the Nehruvian era had led to a system of inefficient resource use, environmental degradation, and regional imbalances that have fostered social inequities in our nation. In their classic book, Ecology and Equity, The Use and Abuse of Nature in Contemporary India, Madhav Gadgil and Ramchandra Guha reflect on what has been achieved and on what more could be done to counter the forces of environmental destruction in India. As Professor Karan notes in his review of this book, because of the development policies from 1947 to 1995, the authors Gadgil and Guha contend that three groups of people from the ecological viewpoint have emerged in India. These groups are omnivores or biosphere people, ecological refugees, and ecosystem people. These three groups continue to exist in India in 2024 as well. So, what exactly are the omnivores? The omnivores who devour resources form 1/6 of the India's Indian population. They are the real beneficiaries of the economic development model that has dominated over the last 75 years or so. This group includes modern entrepreneurs and business interests. Development in India was quickly equated with channeling the nation's resources to a narrow elite of omnivores which includes powerful landowners and city dwellers in the organized industrial and service sectors. These resource flows were driven by large-scale state-sponsored subsidies. This has created a system of highly inefficient resource use, a system that led to resource exhaustion, even as it created social inequities and regional imbalances. Let us now turn to the second group, the ecosystem people. Who are the ecosystem people? This second group, ecosystem people, constitutes four-fifths of India's rural population. These people depend on the natural environment of their own locality to meet most of their material needs. The ecosystem people live close to the natural resource base on which they have traditionally been dependent. They must cultivate small plots of land to grow their own food, gather fuel wood or dung to cook, and to cook their homes with build their homes with bamboo or mud. Now let us turn to the third group, the ecological refugees. Who are the ecological refugees? Ecological refugees are the displaced peasants and Adivasis or indigenous peoples. Their displacement has been the result of the implementation of massive and ecologically unsound development projects. When their lands were submerged due to the construction of dams, they received paltry sums in compensation. Paper mills were granted stands of bamboo at throwaway prices. The mills quickly exhausted the bamboo and turned to eucalyptus groves. But thousands of rural artisans who depended on bamboo had no such option, and they were forced to become ecological refugees. According to Gadgil and Guha, nearly one third of India's peoples are ecological refugees. Please note that the divisions between these three groups are not strict or clear cut. Some people can belong to two groups at the same time. For example, a village school teacher may be on the lower rungs of the omnivore group because he gets a salary from the government, but he is also part of the ecosystem people because he owns and farms his small plot of land to grow much of his family's food. But you get the general picture. The real beneficiaries of economic development over the last 75 years are a small group of omnivores or biosphere people whose resource catchment spans all of India and much of the world. This group is less than 15% of India's population today. Most of the 1.4 billion people of India today fall into two groups, either the ecosystem people or the ecological refugees. While talking about peasants or farmers of India, one cannot but mention the powerful contemporary farmers movement in India. It is useful to analyze some features and the operations of the main interlocutor of the contemporary farmers movement, which is the Indian state. Following independence, the Indian state has traveled through two main eras of what may be called democratic developmentalism. One, the mixed economy phase from 1947 to 1991, characterized by the dominance of the one political party, the left of center Indian National Congress, and two, the neoliberal globalization phase from 1991 to the present, characterized by the emerging dominance of one political party, the far-right Bharatiya Janata Party or BJP, which today espouses a mix of hardline Hindutva or political and cultural Hindu nationalism and neoliberal capitalism. Second, India is one of the very few global south countries to have created a strong tradition of formal democracy. Since the beginning, the Indian state has played a major role in industrializing the country, including capitalizing the food and agricultural systems. The Indian state has helped to strengthen a modern democracy and foster civil society in India. A third feature of India is that although certain states or regions are fast urbanizing, India still continues to be a rural society with possibly the largest group of peasants or farmers in the world. Most farmers in India today are smallholders owning less than 2 hectares of land per household. In 1947, when India became free, according to Professor Surinder Jodhka, Indian agriculture was an example of everything that was wrong with the economy of an underdeveloped country. Though nearly 75% of the working population of India was occupied with farming on its extensive agricultural lands, India's farmlands could not yield enough food for its population. India had to import a significant amount of food grains from the food surplus core countries of the West, with the United States being the main supplier. Imported food grains came with conditionalities that were difficult for a nation trying to restore its lost dignity after a long history of European colonization and a nation which was the leader of the emerging non-aligned movement on NAM of the third world countries. Though the very uneven distribution of farmland across the country was a major concern of many groups within the newly independent country, in the 1960s, the Indian government chose to put an emphasis on the industrialization of agriculture instead of thoroughgoing land reforms. From the vantage point of 2024, it appears that the Indian state could have done both: increase yields through use of technological innovations and also carry out extensive land reforms to benefit the tillers. However, the Indian state at that time chose to focus on the Green Revolution strategy to ward off widespread hunger and the ever present threat of a communist revolution, as well as the crippling dependence on food imports from Western countries. Due to the Green Revolution, which was in large measure the result of the largesse of the United States government, American foundations, and the American scientific community, India has emerged self-sufficient in food grains. Famines, which were a regular and particularly devastating feature of the colonial era, have not occurred since 1947, though hunger continues to stalk the land. In November 1991, following a serious foreign exchange crisis, the government of India accepted loans from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank under the rubric of a structural adjustment program. The Indian government began to implement neoliberal reforms with the strong support of domestic and international capital. In 1995, India joined the World Trade Organization or WTO, which led to the easing of quantitative restrictions on agricultural imports. As the 2021 dossier by Tricontinental notes, Indian farmers, who were mostly smallholders with paltry subsidies from their government, were forced into competition with multinational agribusinesses and with core country farmers, mostly operating on thousands of acres of land and receiving huge subsidies from their governments. Though India is urbanizing at a fast pace, 2 in 3 Indians still live in the countryside, according to the most recent census, that of 2011. Out of a population of 1.2 billion in 2011, 833 million or so lived in rural India. Many of these individuals living in rural India are either farmers or agricultural workers, but there are others who work in allied occupations such as weaving, artisanal work, carpentry, forestry, mining, and industry. Though agriculture and allied sectors comprising the rural economy accounted for only 17.4% of the GDP in 2017, these sectors employ over half the Indian population. Farmers also provide the backbone of national self-sufficiency in food grains and India's food security. Landlords had for many decades, even centuries, dominated rural India. Such landlords shared in the core country's imperial robbery of the countryside's wealth. However, in the 1980s and 1990s, the Indian countryside had come to be controlled by petty capitalist farmers, Many of the farmers' movements in various parts of the country in the 1990s and the early 21st century were led by these groups of petty capitalist farmers. Such movements included those led by powerful farm leaders and their formations, such as Sharad Joshi's Shetkari Sangathan in Maharashtra, Professor Nanjunda Swami's Karnataka Rajya Raita Sangha in Karnataka, and Mahendra Tikayat's Bharatiya Kisan Union in northern India. Now, let us go back to the year 2000. In the early years of the 21st century, the government at the center was ruled by coalitions led by either the Congress or the BJP. There were some attempts made by the Congress led coalition government to provide relief to struggling farmers, including improving agricultural credit, public investments in rural areas, and a rural employment guarantee scheme. Such measures, reminiscent of the dirigist phase of development from 1947 to 1991, was followed by a return to the deregulation of the agriculture sector, both by the Congress led political alliance 2009 to 2014 and the Modi led BJP government since 2014. In the last 10 years or so, successive central governments have deregulated the fertilizer and seed sectors, liberalized land leases, opened agriculture to futures trading, and unleashed privatization policies that has led to farmland grabs by corporate houses. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi formed his government at the center in 2014, he was greeted with a collapse in international prices of export crops such as cotton, 2 years of drought, and a general slowdown in agricultural growth rates. These were symptoms of the agrarian crisis that had been building up since 1991. Instead of tackling the crisis, Modi's government chose to inflict three further economic disasters on rural and urban India. These were demonetization in 2016, the goods and services tax in 2017, and the sudden COVID-19 lockdown announced in March 2020. The effects of demonetization were as follows: by withdrawing more than 80% of the currency from circulation without warning, Modi's government forced demand to shrink, including the demand for farm goods. Farmers were forced to throw away milk and vegetables just as they found the cash in their hands to be worthless. Similarly, the implementation of GST had a devastating effect on the agricultural markets. The small profit margins of petty traders and retail businesses were cut, and a greater presence of monopoly firms in place of the more diversified petty trader sector became the new reality. Finally, by imposing a sudden lockdown, the BJP government pushed millions of migrant workers to walk away from their city jobs and return to their homes in villages and smaller towns. When COVID-19 infection and death rates accelerated, the demand for farm goods fell. This intensified the crisis for farmers who were without safety nets. Now, let me turn to the documentary Nero's Guest. One insightful person who had watched Nero's Guest writes in 2015 in his blog spot that it can be hard to notice that India has an agrarian crisis. For isn't this the land of 1,000 cuisines, an exporter of rice and wheat? Doesn't Indian tea color the milk of a people in 100 countries? And wasn't the hunt for Indian spices the refrain of world history? Evidently, the government and mainstream media did not notice the agrarian crisis unfolding in India over the last 30 years, as they have been somehow blind to the wave of Indian farmers who have committed suicide over the last 30 years. But I would argue that the powerful documentary Nero's Guest, a 52 minutes documentary which was released some 15 years ago in 2009, has changed the situation somewhat. There is now greater awareness among Indian non farming people, especially the educated city dwellers, about the plight of Indian small and medium scale farmers. Nero's Guest is a famed documentary directed by Bhatia, and it features P. Sainath, whom we are honored to have here today. Nero's Guest is built around a series of lectures and articles written by Mr. Sainath, the rural affairs editor of a renowned Indian daily, The Hindu, for over 30 years at that time. Sainath has been deeply involved with agricultural and rural issues in India. Sainath's investigative approach and compelling commentary on the events that unfold in the film instill the film with lucidity and passion. By the medium of the film, a parallel is drawn between the infamous Roman Emperor Nero and his guest, and the omnivores of India who are oblivious to the miserable conditions of most farmers of our country. Emperor Nero threw a garden party and invited all the elites in Rome to this garden party. However, as night fell and it grew dark, the issue Nero faced was that of providing illumination for his guests. To provide illumination at night for his garden party, prisoners, criminals, and local people were burnt alive at stake. The guests at the party, who were the elites of Rome, did not raise any objections to such a cruel and inhumane act. This documentary compares the happenings at Nero's garden party with the current situation in India, where farmers are falling into death traps and committing suicides at an increasing rate. The ruling classes of India, the well to do people of the country, and the mainstream media choose to ignore this phenomenon of an unprecedented wave of farmer suicides. In India, nearly 60% of the population is still dependent on agriculture, and an unprecedented wave of farmer suicides since the liberalization of the agriculture sector in the 1990s is occurring. It shows how all the policies by the government have been adopted to look after the interest of the corporate sector and those of the rich Western countries. Sainath goes on to show how cynical the society is by stating how the Lakme India Fashion Week in Mumbai was attended by more than 500 reporters covering the event. The models were displaying cotton gowns, while in a region near Mumbai called Vidarbh, the men and women who grew the cotton crop were taking their lives at the rate of 6 to 8 per day. The writings of Sainath and other journalists compelled the officials and ministers to visit Vidarbh. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited the villages, and the media followed his suit. Relief and compensation were announced for the farmers. However, Sainath criticizes the government for waking up too late. It took 10 years for the Prime Minister to visit the family of farmers who had committed suicides in a place where almost 40,000 suicides had been committed since 1995, according to government data. Of course, more farmers have committed suicide in the last 15 years. To understand why many of us have become Nero's guests, let me give you some background about the global and the Indian situation. The current oligopolistic structure of international food trade has translated into sustained degradation of food security among nations while bringing small scale farmers to the brink of annihilation in India and many other countries. Though India has a thriving services sector and an active manufacturing sector, its economy continues to be an agrarian economy. A major part of its rural population is still dependent upon agriculture as the main source of their income. Post 1947, the Indian government has tried to shift the economy's focus towards self reliance and introduced several policies that they thought would benefit the farmers. However, these policies have only acted as a tool for the oppression of the small and middle income farmers. Even though various schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Vikas Yojana, Agricultural Debt Waiver, Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana have been introduced, they have failed to provide a solution that really benefits the farmers. The government of India introduced the Green Revolution as a step towards self reliance. However, even though it created self sufficiency in the realm of cereal, the Green Revolution brought with itself new techniques like the use of high yielding varieties or HYV seeds and expensive inputs like synthetic fertilizers and synthetic pesticides. A farmer in NERO'S guest documentary says the cost of farming has increased, yet the crop does not yield returns. While the inputs are getting costlier, the yield as well as the prices the farmer can sell the produce at are staying low. It is argued that a huge agricultural reform or modernization of agriculture was brought about in India by scientists who did not understand the Indian economy or the Indian agricultural system or the Indian society or Indian culture. As Sainath says in the film, learned people from prestigious universities make the decision about farmers whose lives they know nothing about. To get the desired results in terms of yield, the use of HYV seeds also requires synthetic fertilizers and synthetic pesticides, besides ample amounts of water. Such inputs led to the degradation of the soil. The inputs had to be bought from the market and were expensive and required a lot of investment. And this led to farmers borrowing money from informal channels at high rates of interest. On top of loans, the HYV and other kinds of modern seeds often gave low yields or there were crop failures, and so the farmers could not afford to repay the loans and thus they fell into a debt trap. With no help from the state or community, they felt there was no recourse but suicide. The income disparity in India is growing at a faster rate than its economic development. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the poor have become poorer, while India's billionaire count reached 142 in 2021. The debate that arises here is that of efficiency versus equity. It can be argued that small farmers are inefficient and thus they get quote unquote eliminated by the economic system. However, it is very important to understand that authentic efficiency cannot be reached without working towards equity. We cannot be a society which stands by as farmers fall into death traps and turn to suicide as the only way out. Equity is necessary to create real efficiency in the economic system. The cotton clothes sold in the market and worn by models at fashion weeks are sold at very high prices, while the farmers who grow such cotton are committing suicide. Even today, the mainstream media, which is supposed to keep the citizens of a democracy well informed about the situations in their country, turns a blind eye to reporting farmer suicides in India. Huge media teams capture fashion weeks and actors' birthday parties, but there are very few rural reporters in India today. The phenomenon of farmer suicide has had a huge impact on the rural community in many parts of India, but the matter is not being taken up by government authorities or the mainstream media. Sainath has taken on the responsibility to increase awareness of the fates of the victims, both the farmers and their families, by publishing their stories in the daily newspaper. This is unusual because not a single newspaper in this country has a correspondent working full time on poverty issues. In other words, in the eyes of the Indian elite, over 50% of the Indian population is not newsworthy. Such overwhelming poverty is apparently not digestible by the newspaper reading public. Over the last 20 years, the Indian government has systematically cut support to Indian farmers in the form of subsidies, minimum price, guaranteed pricing, and low cost loans in a bid to make them more competitive. With trade policies demanding that Indian farmers compete in global markets, the agricultural policies have seen a paradigm shift from supporting the notion of self sufficiency to income generation and hence cash cropping. As subsidized fertilizer, water, and power have all slowly disappeared, Indian farmers now purchase these inputs at market prices. However, they are not guaranteed a minimum purchase price for their products, and as the market is open to international vagaries, Indian farmers often find themselves unable to recover the cost of their inputs from the sale of their produce. In such cases, farmers usually borrow from local money lenders, experiencing continued poor returns, staring insolvency in their face, and unable to provide for their families. Farmers all over India are taking their lives today. While the issue of inequality in global trade is a complex macroeconomic problem faced by a large section of the global population, the film captures the micro effects of such policies on families and individuals. Deeply moving sequences are constructed around Sainath's visits to families in which recent suicides have taken place. The filmmaker Deepa Bhatia positions such subjects as dignified, articulate, and resilient, even in the face of blatant injustice. While the issue of farming and agriculture is usually populated by male voices, Bhatia frequently finds female subjects who reveal the emotional toll of economic insecurity. Sainath's comments on the disconnect between the policymakers and the ground reality of life as a migrant laborer in India are poignant. He associates the changes occurring with the Indian economy with the distorted global trade regime enforced by the WTO and the current oligopolistic structure of the international food trade, where tremendous power is concentrated within a few corporations. This has translated into sustained degradation in food security within nations while bringing small scale farmers to the brink of annihilation. The issue of farmer suicide has been largely seen as too difficult and something of a dampener on the festivities around India's recent economic successes. The commercial and state run media have ignored it. The mainstream media is totally corrupted today as it does not cover anything that is not breaking news or that is not considered glamorous. For this obvious reason, the documentary Nero's Guest has been ignored by the mainstream media, both print and electronic, and is not given its due space and visibility. Nero's Guest is the unequivocal portrayal of a nation where an elite or omnivores pursuing an agenda prescribed by international agencies with little commitment to Indian realities dominates the national interest. It comes as a reality check against the celebration of dizzying economic growth rates and the burgeoning consumerism that claim to be the face of modern India. The angst and frustration of Sainath is very contagious. His aggressive and emotionally charged narration, supported with well researched facts and data, has been able to drive home the message loud and clear. It not only brings out the absolute failure in handling of the crisis by the respective center and state governments, both the BJP and the Congress, but also their complete apathy and inaction towards the crisis, government after government. Towards the end of the documentary, Sainath answers a student's question by saying, in deciding policy measures, as Mahatma Gandhi said, recall the face of the poorest and the weakest person and ask yourself how the action you contemplate puts them in a better place. Sainath asks the important question of who Nero's guests are in the current context. Nero's guests were totally apathetic when people of their own country were being burnt alive. Sainath asks us not to become Nero's guest. Most of the omnivores of India, who constitute less than 15% of the population of India, and who are the real beneficiaries of the economic development model of the last 75 years, are Nero's guest. I would suggest that the solution to India's agrarian crisis and the predicament of India's small farmers will be somewhat solved with the strengthening of a Gandhian model of development which focuses on the economic development of village India, land reforms, and the empowerment of small farmers through sustained decentralization of economic and political power. We can discuss more about this in the question and answer session. This brings my talk to a close. I am honored that Sainath is listening to us today. Thank you very much, all of you, for patiently listening to me. Let me mention that I have depended upon several published articles and books in this presentation. I will be glad to send you the references upon request. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devparna, for your really comprehensive background to the issues that Sainath raises in the film. Thank you very much. And I request P. Sainath to respond now.
Actually, Geeta, I think maybe your participants want to
Okay.
ask me things about the film.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I will just
So,
say two things before
yeah.
so that they know. First is that my creative contribution to the documentary is zero. It is entirely made by Deepa Bhatia, who was my student 30 years ago, and at the Sophia Polytechnic, where I teach journalism since 1986-87. The only reason I agreed to allow this was actually the producers were a consortium of national broadcasters of some 10 or 12 EU countries, from France to Finland, and the Finnish filmmaker was a close friend. In fact, that's why you find me abusing him in the film, and I only agreed to it because it was Deepa they chose to make the film. I trusted her, and in fact, she was so unobtrusive. Deepa followed me around and shot over my shoulder without disturbing me or the interviews. Otherwise, I would not have been able to cope with it. In fact, she did such a good job that I am horribly embarrassed by it, and I should tell you that I have never seen NERO'S Guess at one sitting. I saw it in blocks on her editing table, and when others are watching, maybe I've got a few minutes with them because I find it terribly embarrassing. She got me as I was, insanely enraged and anger, and I don't know, I find my own self very embarrassing on film. So these are the things you should know. And by the way, Deepa took up that thing because she was deeply disturbed by the articles I was putting out in the Hindu. I was concentrating on the 5 states. Now there are 6 states, which now in fact 7, because Madhya Pradesh has been divided, Andhra has been divided. I was concentrating on what were then 5 states where over 70% of the suicides were taking place. The other thing I will tell you in terms of what's the direction it's been going, I think that the Indian media have never even made the distinction between agricultural crisis and agrarian crisis, and actually the two are different. Second, it's after the success of the film and the Hindu articles, and I really have to give credit to N. Ram, that he created a platform of putting rural India on the front page, and it's in all its warts. The success of that actually led to a number. Academia had completely ignored this crisis till then. It led not only to touching some academics into action, it also led to several academics from here to Australia to USA, entirely pro-corporate, pro-establishment academics, writing articles denouncing the idea of the scale of suicides and saying, actually, women's suicides, one BPW paper, suicides by women are greater than those by farmers. Now, this is such a bloody misogynistic statement because it then assumes that women cannot be farmers. Okay. Many of the young, and then student suicides, many girls who have committed suicide, or I shouldn't say committed, I would say took their lives by suicide. Committed sounds like a crime, like you commit arson or it's a lesson I have learned only in the last 5 years that I should not be using that word. But the girls whom I knew in this, whose suicides I covered in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, they were called student suicides. They were not students taking their lives because of failure. They were toppers in their classes. When the crisis comes along, the parents have to withdraw them from school or college, including those on full scholarship, so that they can work at home. If the parents have a boy and a girl, they'll withdraw the girl first and try to give the boy another 2 years. That's how it. So all these girls were farm girls. Many of those coming and girls' suicides in the students category, absolutely thousands of suicides of women marked as housewives. They were farmers. 60 to 65% of all work done in agriculture in the country is done by women. Okay. So you have actually a devastating figure, official figure of some excess of 400,000 suicides since 1995. Right. And that is an horrible underestimation, given that thousands upon thousands of women farmer suicides have not been counted because of social prejudices, not because of the definition of farmer in the census. The census definition is quite generous. So if you look at Adivasi farmers are largely excluded from the suicide numbers because they are seen to be on encroached land. Dalit farmers are not considered farmers in the village. They're working on government distributed land. So a lot of sins of omission occurred, which were of societal by nature. After Mr. Modi comes, they become sins of commission as well, by changing the methodology of counting, by changing the definition of farmer and farm laborer. So these things, I mean, if you want to talk about them, I'm very grateful to Devparna for her very kind words about my thing. But this is Deepa Bhatia's film, and she followed me around. I mean, she was very close to me and was not just my student, but subsequently for the last 3 decades, a good friend. She is right now planning to make a serial out of my new book, The Last Heroes, Foot Soldiers of Indian Freedom, the last living freedom fighters who were given nothing in the 75th year of independence or on Republic Day. And all the last 3 celebrations of Republic Day and Independence Day don't match up to an nth of the orgy you saw on January 22nd. So she's planning to make a serial on that. And to give you a scale, when the time the film was made, we were seeing on official figures, 1 suicide every 32 minutes of farmers. And as I said, many academics came into the picture, including Jagdish Bhagwati and Panagaria, to say that these were actually a very low number of suicides, because look at the number of farmers as part of the society. They were horribly wrong in two ways. One, they were counting 53% of the country as farmers. 53% of the 53% they're thinking about are not farmers, they are the agrarian community. The larger community is dependent on agriculture. Actually, if you go by the census, the percentage of full-time farmers, main cultivators, is less than 8%, which is still 95 million. Then if you add agricultural laborers or marginal cultivators, everything comes to about 22-24%, which is a gigantic number in absolute numbers. So one should also look at the horrible amount of, you'll actually find very, very elaborate, Bhagwati and Panagaria put it into a book. Other academics wrote fiercely in Lancet and not knowing a thing about what was happening. Yeah. So anyone wants to ask me about the film, because you're really about talking films online. So you want to ask me about the film? I'm happy to discuss it with you, because the larger canvas has been very elaborately presented to you by Devparna. So I don't want to repeat that.
Yeah, thank you so much, P. Sainath. Would any of the participants have a question or a comment? Pratishtha, would you like to speak? Pratishtha Pandya works for People's Archive of Rural India. She is an associate of P. Sainath.
Hi, Geeta. I thank you. So I have watched the film more than once, and I'm afraid the questions that are in my mind, or what I'm thinking about, is outside the film as well. So 1996 is when I think Everybody Loves a Good Drought came out, Sainath, the first edition, and from that time onwards, you've been tracking the poorest district in India, and from there to 2009, when the film was made, and from there to today, 2024, the suicide have not stopped. So NCR beats data on 2023 shows almost 1,100 plus farmers dying across the country in 2022, meaning 30 farmers a day, if I've understood it on an average. India's sliding down the global hunger index, questions of climate justice coming more pressing, public sector jobs are becoming weaker, public sector is becoming weaker. So there's no question of, job creation, which you're talking about in the movie. Like if you're moving people, you're depriving agriculture of subsidies, and what alternatives you're creating. So that's not happening. The billionaires list that you mentioned there also is kind of perennially growing. It has got a boost during the COVID also. The party continues, in other words, the guests keep pouring, gods become the guests now. So the question is, and as opposed to that, you've also seen the farmers putting up a kind of struggle that they did against the new farm laws, and the state repealing those laws in 2021. So how does this victories fare against the larger scheme of things that you see? And what do you see as the role of journalism in the middle of all this? So, yeah.
By the way, if you look at the Nero's guest, the title tells you Nero's guest, and then it says, in the age of inequality, right? That's what it tells you. Our number of dollar billionaires has more than doubled since the documentary was made. More than doubled. India today has 174 US dollar billionaires. That is number 3 in the world. Number 3 in the world after the US and Germany. We have more dollar billionaires than all the Nordic countries put together. We have more dollar billionaires than Japan, than Australia, than Canada, you name it. The same country that is number 3 in the dollar billionaires list is number 132 in the Human Development Index of the United Nations, which the government has attacked viciously and got its tame academics to write pieces questioning the methodology. No one then, the Global Hunger Index, where we were once 94 out of 117, we are today 111. That is IFPRI's index, International Food Policy Research Institute, where we were once 94 out of 116 or 117, we are 111 out of 121. Okay. And then Environmental Performance Index, which is devised by departments of the universities of Yale and Columbia. We managed an incredible first in 22, 180 out of 180. That's where we ranked. In the VDEM, in the democracy, this thing of, VDEM Institute, we have fallen and fallen and fallen. Yeah. In the World Press Freedom Index, brought out by Reporters Sans Frontières, Reporters Without Borders, where once we were 94, under the UPA government, which was also quite horrible with media. But I mean, these guys, present gang, made the UPA look really liberal. The UPA brought it to some 139, that rank. This government brought it to 142 and now 161. In the World Press Freedom Index, we are 161 out of 180 nations. All these indexes have been questioned, and academics and the Surjit Ballas and the Panigriyas, etc., have written attacking these things, flawed methodology, or of course plain jealousy, because India is doing so well, everybody's jealous of us. No one has written anything attacking the methodology of Forbes, which places us number 3 in the list of world billionaires. Okay? So you are on the one hand, that concentrate. Look, let me define for you what I see as the agrarian crisis in 5 words. Corporate hijack of Indian agriculture. You name the input that farmers use, and I'll show you who controls it. Whether it's seeds or pesticides or nutrients, soil nutrient supplements in several states, water distribution and electricity distribution, DISCOMs, all those have also been privatized and are controlled by corporates. The state of Chhattisgarh in 2010 performed an incredible first by privatizing an 18-kilometer stretch of the Sainath River. They actually privatized management of 18, I thought at the time they got tired of selling people down the river, they're just selling the river. So that is the extent. Everything has moving and has moved or is moving towards corporate control. The 3 farm laws, which were the sort of final great leap forward into corporate control. And that's what the farmers fought. Yeah. This time, unlike at the time of earlier agitations, the farmers were naming corporations, Ambani, Adani. Now that you didn't see in the media much, because Ambani is the biggest owner of media in the country. And Adani is making a fair bid to give him a run for his money, having bought NDTV and destroyed it, and Quint and he's got other investments coming in the media. So you had a phenomenal struggle by farmers, and farm laborers participated in that struggle. A huge front, which in fact in Punjab had the effect of uniting Hindus and Sikhs, because the Hindu traders, the Baniyas, etc., where, they all had their contradictions with each other. The traders with the farmers with farm laborers, but all of them were there in that agitation. And the response from the rest of the country's farmers was phenomenal. Nowhere have your media told you that was the largest democratic, peaceful, constitutional protest organized in the world, organized at the height of the pandemic. Please remember that the last internationally famous struggle for justice was 2011, the Occupy Wall Street, which consisted of a few thousand people occupying Zuccotti Park, mainly young people dominated by young techies. And it was a wonderful thing to see. At the end of 9 weeks, the mayor and the government gave the order, throw them out, and it took the NYPD 10, 12 hours to clear Zuccotti Park of the greatest protest organized in New York. Your farmers lasted 53 weeks and could not be thrown out. They fought through the worst winter Delhi in 40 years, through its worst summer in a decade, through some of the lousiest monsoon rains. 720 farmers died of hypothermia. You were hit with icy cold water in winter from water cannon. There seemed to be a greater mobilization of security forces there than on the line of actual control with China. Okay. I think the farmers, what you were asking about, I think, what did they show us? They showed us the meaning of the word resistance. However, it doesn't, the victory in getting the laws taken back does not does not solve the agrarian crisis. That's a much larger thing. But it shows you the meaning of the word resistance. 53 weeks, 720 deaths. And nobody could throw them out, not the BSF, the paramilitaries, the CRP, nothing, CISF, all the police that Delhi could muster could not throw them out. I think they've shown you a way forward of struggle and a constitutional protest.
Thank you. Anyone else has a question or a comment?
So, Mr. Sainath, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you specifically about cotton. I have been working on cotton and with cotton farmers in Gujarat, especially since the year 1999. So I also wanted to take this opportunity to plug my friend Jaideep Hardikar's excellent book, Ram Rao, The Story of India's Farm Crisis, HarperCollins publication by Jaideep Hardikar. And in the Telegraph on 12th of January, Jaideep published an op-ed, 12th January 2024. It's called Torn Fabric. Indian agricultural scientific fraternity needs to wake up. So he's basically talking here about the pink bollworm infestation, which might finish off cotton in India completely. We do not have any non-GM seeds in cotton in India. Over the last 20 years, there's been a systematic destroy, like the non-GM seeds, that is the hybrid seeds or land races, have been destroyed, and the GM seeds, that the BT cotton seeds, will not work in the face of pink bollworm. So does this lead to more chances of farmers killing themselves? And what is the duty of Indian citizens at this time? Thank you.
See, the first thing is that the farm suicides are not the agrarian crisis. They are its manifestation. They are its outcome, not its cause. They are its, they are its context, not its content. They are the most tragic face of the crisis, but they are its outcome, not its origin. it is actually, it shows you how callous we are, that it is actually much easier to stop the suicides than to solve the agrarian crisis. But even that we are not willing to do. About cotton, there are historic roots to this. See, I always say, I wrote long ago about the 3 C's of colonialism: cane, cotton, and coffee. The amount of blood these crops, especially cotton, have, you know, the amount of blood, I mean, the cotton has historically been soaked in blood of the colonized. In in the area that you were looking at, Gujarat, in the 1850s, till the 1850s, India was not a major exporter of cotton at all. It was not an exporter of raw produce. It was an exporter of full garments. Yeah. India, Egypt, and China dominated the world of silks, for instance, but cotton garments as well. And remember your famous Dhaka muslin and all those other kind of garments. We were exporting full garments. Then now, the most highly profit-making monopolies in the world were those of Lancashire and Manchester. The reason Lancashire and Manchester were the most profitable companies in history, most profitable industries in history, was because their raw material input was almost free. It came from the blood-stained cotton fields of the southern states of United States, slave cultivated cotton. So that's why the profits were so huge. Ultimately, your source of inputs, your raw material, are such a critical thing, and the cost of labor. When you were getting it from slaves, that blood-stained cotton accounted for the super monopoly profits of Lancashire and Manchester. Then in 1861, the Americans go and unreasonably have a civil war over it. And that destroys supplies of cotton for the next half a decade to Lancashire and Manchester. Lancashire and Manchester, then what England does is to force cultivate cotton in Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, in the regions which are today Vidarbha. In these very regions, the British force cultivate cotton. A lot of food crop land is converted to cotton cultivation. And incidentally, the first round of suicides already occurs in the 1870s. Because so you force cultivate cotton, it leads to 2 problems. One, there is a net decline in the land under food cultivation. Because meanwhile, the British are doing other crop cultivation imposition in Kerala and elsewhere. So you're looking at a net decline in food production, a net decline, and the subsequent famines and famine deaths that come with that. Secondly, for a few years, Indian cotton going C.T. Kurian in Globalization and Indian Capitalism has given you the numbers. In fact, Rajni Palme Dutt gives you the numbers in his 1942 book, India Today, proscribed by the British government. So suddenly you become a gigantic exporter of raw cotton. And then what happens? The war ends, the Civil War ends, America returns to the global market, and cotton prices collapse across the world. So all those African countries and Egypt and India and elsewhere see a wave of suicides. In fact, the first wave of cotton farmer suicides happens there. You'll also find in the 1920s that there are major suicides of Parsi traders who were dealing with cotton and things like that. By the way, Jaideep was spent the whole day here today. He has been a friend and fellow traveler and done most of his work in Vidarbha alongside me on the same travel. Yeah. So the cotton thing, the other thing you can look at is that, yes, the loss of, there are still things like in Rajasthan, Narma Behari, individual strains of cotton. Indian cotton was historically and is far more pest resilient, drought resistant. But when the British tried cultivating cotton in India, when they, we are doing the same mistakes again. We were made to change the cotton we grew because, it was ridiculed as short staple, medium staple. They wanted long staple. The reason they wanted that, there is no intrinsic merit in my view with long staple, medium staple. There's no such intrinsic merit in one. But the problem for the Brits was that the invention of the cotton jenny in Georgia, that took only long staple, and medium and short staple would break on it. So instead of creating the technology to match Indian cotton, they changed Indian cotton to and brought in outside exotic species. Those species are incidentally, the British failed to convert all of Indian cotton. They succeeded by the time they left 14-15%. In the next 50-60 years, we converted remaining 80% into foreign thing. And many of the pest attacks that come after 2000 are because GM or BT cotton kills all pests, including beneficial pests, which gives rise to predators whom they were keeping down. Okay. Now those, so suddenly you were seeing the pink bollworm, you were seeing the Lashkari Oli, which is called the military worm because of the stripes it has on the body. It's called the military worm. Farmers were telling us we have not seen this in our lifetime. They came with the new breeds, they came with the new seeds. Because what happened? Oh, another thing, the new PL 480 had created certain kinds of crop patterns and certain kinds had an impact on the agriculture. Now the new pests were happy to discover a host in India from the old PL 480 days, from varieties that were there from the late 60s onwards. So you had a gigantic proliferation of pests. In fact, GM, BT, whatever the claims, the fact is that the use of pesticides has not fallen. And cotton is the major consumer of pesticides in the country. There are claims made, I have not found the verification of any of them to be satisfactory. The farmers I know are using more and more pesticide to kill more and more pests. So yeah, so that danger is there. And a large part of Indian cotton species have already been devastated. There are some trying to keep seed banks and things, and we've got to do what we can do with that.
Any other questions, comments? Yes,
Hello.
Mahesh, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Myself Mahesh.
Yeah, ma'am.
और यस सर, आज के टॉपिक से अभी मैं अपने आप को 3 धागों से कनेक्टेड महसूस कर रहा हूँ और मैं आपको बहुत आइडियल मानता हूँ। मैं एक फार्मर फैमिली से बिलोंग करता हूँ और उसके बाद मैं एक मीडिया स्टूडेंट रहा, उसके बाद मैं एक मीडिया रिसर्चर अभी हूँ।
हाँ।
तो ये 3 धागों से मैं अपने आप को इस टॉपिक से कनेक्टेड करता हूँ और मैं ये जानना चाहता हूँ कि जब मैंने मीडिया स्टूडेंट एज अ मास्टर्स ज्वाइन किया, तो कुछ अलग आइडियल हमारे सामने थे। तो जब धीरे धीरे हम लोग उसमें और डीप में चले गए, तो हमें पता चला कि एग्रीकल्चरल जो बीट्स है वो बहुत कम फार्मर, बहुत कम जर्नलिस्ट जो है कवर करते हैं, फुल टाइम बहुत कम है। और आपका नाम सामने आया तब हमने आपके बारे में जाना, हमने आपको पढ़ा। एवरीबडी लव्स गुड थॉट बुक्स वगैरह हमने पढ़ी आपकी। तो आप जर्नलिज्म पर्सपेक्टिव में इस बात को कैसे रखना चाहेंगे कि कैसे इसको और बेहतर किया जा सके, और कैसे इसको और लोगों के पास पहुंचाया जा सके?
तो महेश, ऐसा है कि जो जर्नलिज्म जो एग्रीकल्चर में हो रहा है, कॉर्पोरेटाइजेशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर, वो मीडिया में पहले हो चुका है। मिड 1980s से मीडिया का कॉर्पोरेट ओनरशिप बढ़ रहा है ना। अभी देखो,
यस सर।
सबसे बड़ा मीडिया नेटवर्क कौन सा है? नेटवर्क 18,
यस
जिसके
सर।
पास जिसके पास 25-30 चैनल है। मालिक कौन है? मुकेश अंबानी।
यस सर।
हाँ। टाइम्स ग्रुप देखो, सबसे बड़ा पब्लिकेशंस ग्रुप, न्यूज़पेपर।
जी सर।
दुनिया में सेकंड और थर्ड बिगेस्ट इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज न्यूज, फर्स्ट और सेकंड इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज न्यूज़पेपर। सर्कुलेशन 7 मिलियन तक वो सब है उसका। 7 lakhs पर डे, उससे ज्यादा मुंबई में एंड वेस्ट में। लेकिन ये all this has meant media have become corporates। जब जब आप ज्वाइन किया, एक आइडियल मन में, एक आइडियल था आपका, दिल में एक आइडियल था, वो 160 साल तक हिंदुस्तान का मीडिया 1822 में, आई काउंट फाउंडिंग डेट ऑफ इंडियन ओन्ड जर्नल्स, राजा राम मोहन रॉय का मिरातुल अखबार 1822, मतलब 2022 में 200 साल कंप्लीट किया आपका प्रिंट मीडिया। उसमें मैं समझता हूं कि 160 साल वी कैन बी वेरी प्राउड ऑफ। कौन था आपका पत्रकार? राजा राम मोहन रॉय, महात्मा गांधी, बाबा साहेब अंबेडकर, भगत सिंह। हाँ, ये बहुत लोग नहीं जानते हैं कि भगत सिंह मार्टिर था, रेवोल्यूशनरी था, उसका प्रोफेशनल ऑक्यूपेशन पत्रकार। हमारा इतिहास में एक ही पत्रकार जो 4 भाषा में लिखा, अंग्रेजी, हिंदी, पंजाबी, उर्दू। और उनका लास्ट 270 दिन जेल में जब रहा, एक और भाषा सीखा, फारसी, पर्शियन, और उसमें भी 2 आर्टिकल लिखा। And all this he did by the time he was hanged at age 23. तो ये this was journalism to be proud of। अगर आप गांधी लेंगे या आप अंबेडकर लेंगे, उन दोनों में 3-3 अखबार खोला, और बिटवीन देम 140-150 वॉल्यूम्स ऑफ कलेक्टेड वर्क्स। अरे आप और मैं कितना, एक वॉल्यूम भी नहीं कलेक्ट किया, एक वॉल्यूम नहीं पढ़ा, लेकिन these were journalists, these were real journalists। 1960s के बाद, और जब आपका मीडिया था, all of it was founded, दो 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 स्ट्रीम रहा पहले। जो अंग्रेजी राज ने, उनका टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया, स्टेट्समैन, उनका गोरा लोग फाउंड किया वो पब्लिकेशंस, दे सर्व्ड यूरोपियन कम्युनिटी इन इंडिया। फिर आपका नेशनलिस्ट स्ट्रीम आ गया, which countered the imperialist press। Indian underground press even had a role in 1857 uprising। बंगाल फैमिन का कवरेज स्टेट्समैन से नहीं आया। पहला बंगाल का अंडरग्राउंड प्रेस 1 साल तक, स्टेट्समैन वोक अप 1 year लेट, और उसका उस समय का एडिटर स्टेट्समैन उनका मेमोइर्स में लिखा था, yes, we kept quiet for 1 year, for several months, because we thought the administration would bring it under control. और इसलिए सब आज कहते हैं कि बंगाल फैमिन ऑफ 1943, वो गलत है। बंगाल फैमिन started 1942. It is the Bengal famine of 1942 to 44, 45. और that was covered and exposed by the Bengal underground press, Bengali press. आप पढ़ सकते हैं, Madhushri Professor Madhushri Mukherjee has written a beautiful paper on that in the book Global Muckraking, edited by Anya Shifre. She has also written a very beautiful book, powerful book on Churchill's secret war on the Bengal famine. So the role of the press, Indian press, was phenomenal. The media saw themselves as the voice of the voiceless. They fought. But from 50s, 60s, many of these publications go out of the hands of the families of freedom fighters and they go into the hands of business owners. फिर व्यापार लोग ना इसको खरीदा पूरा। 1980s के बाद वो बिजनेस ओनर्स कॉर्पोरेट्स में इमर्ज होते हैं। दैनिक जागरण एक बड़ा कॉर्पोरेट ओन्ड पेपर है भाई साहब। पता नहीं, इसका 33, 34 एडिशंस है। मैकडोनल्ड्स जर्नलिज्म करते, मैं कहता हूं उसको, इसलिए कि फ्रेंचाइज जर्नलिज्म है। जैसा मैकडोनल्ड्स फ्रेंचाइज बेचती है अलग अलग देश और शहर में, यहां दैनिक जागरण ने, यू वांट टू स्टार्ट अ पेपर, महेश शेल्के वांट्स टू स्टार्ट अ पेपर इन नासिक और इन विदर्भा और इन खानदेश, आप कुछ पैसा दे दो उनको, वो 4 पेजेस एडिट्स और वो सब कंटेंट आपको देता है। यू कैन रन in any language you want in Vidarbha. It will be Dainik Jagran, and you'll have to get advertising and pay them their franchise amount. तो ये corporatization of media आने के बाद rural India goes out of the media. 2017 में Center for Media Studies, Delhi, Dr. Narayan Rao, the oldest media monitoring body in India, research monitoring body in India, उसने मेरे लिए एक टेबल बनाया, रूरल इंडिया का कितना जगह मिलता है अखबार में और टेलीविजन में, और उसने 1-2 नैरो सैंपल नहीं लिया, 6 बड़ा अखबार, 3 अंग्रेजी 3 हिंदी, 6 बड़ा टीवी चैनल, 3 अंग्रेजी 3 हिंदी लेके दे फाउंड मीडिया का फ्रंट पेज पे, जो नेशनल डेली कहते हैं आप, नेशनल डेली का फ्रंट पेज पे जितना न्यूज ऑफ ग्रामीण ओरिजिन न्यूज कितना है, 0.67%। ओके, 0.67%। अगर आप, और वो भी 5 year एवरेज है और एग्जैजरेशन है, इसलिए कि 5 साल के एवरेज में 1 साल इलेक्शन साल होगा। जब चुनाव आएगा तो कवरेज बढ़ जाएगी 15-20% तक। अगर आप नॉन इलेक्शन ईयर्स देखेंगे, इट इज बिटवीन 0.18 to 0.24%. So this is the state of media coverage. और मीडिया में जितना करस्पॉन्डेंट्स है, लैक्मे फैशन वीक के फुल टाइम गॉसिप करस्पॉन्डेंट्स भी है, फुल गोल्फ करस्पॉन्डेंट्स है, लेकिन एक भी अखबार में फुल टाइम नेशनल रूरल अफेयर्स करस्पॉन्डेंट है ही नहीं, ना था। लेकिन एक आदमी था, वो मैं, हिंदू में 10 साल रूरल अफेयर्स एडिटर ऑफ द हिंदू। जब मैं हिंदू छोड़ के चले गए, वो पोस्ट भी बंद हो गया। तो फुल टाइम करस्पॉन्ड, फुल टाइम मतलब आप और किसी काम नहीं कर रहे, और अलग अलग अगर आपको 30 पोर्टफोलियो में ग्रामीण भारत भी लगाएंगे तो आई डू नॉट कंसिडर यू द फुल टाइम करस्पॉन्डेंट। तो ये है, corporate ownership is based on the principle of maximizing profit for the top shareholders. Corporate ownership is not Mother Teresa, much less is it Bhagat Singh or Gandhi or Ambedkar. So the purpose of these publications is for that. In response to that challenge, कुछ नया publications आ रहे हैं, जैसा द वायर है, वो कुछ एफोर्ड करते हैं न्यूज मीडिया में। scroll.in भी कुछ करते हैं, लेकिन scroll.in भी डिपेंडेंट ऑन वेंचर कैपिटलिस्ट, ये सब कुछ लिमिट्स है उसमें। वायर is, I think, more radical in that sense. Frontline, founded by N. Ram, remains one of the best magazines. और उसके अलावा we have People's Archive of Rural India, जहां 0.67% नहीं, पारी में People's Archive of Rural India में we publish in 15 भाषाएं में पब्लिश करते हैं, इंक्लूडिंग भोजपुरी, छत्तीसगढ़ी, और 100% डेडिकेटेड टू रूरल इंडिया। इसलिए वी, बिकॉज ऑफ द स्टेट ऑफ मीडिया, हमने ये स्टार्ट की। एंड वी हैव अ लॉट टू डू, लेकिन यू कैनॉट, इस प्रॉब्लम को आप सॉल्व नहीं कर सकते हैं जब तक आप मीडिया मोनोपोली को तोड़ नहीं सकते। यू हैव टू ब्रेक मोनोपोली, और वो उतना इम्पॉसिबल नहीं है जो लोग समझते हैं। बहुत सारा देश में हुआ मीडिया मोनोपोली कंट्रोल, और इंडिया में भी MRTP एक्ट आया 60s में, 70s में, तो इट कैन बी डन। या
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah,
या
yeah. Thank you, Mahesh. Yeah,
थैंक यू मैम।
yeah.
यस सर। और डॉक्यूमेंट्री की हम बात करें ना सर, तो मैं एवरी टाइम बहुत इमोशनल होता हूँ जब मैं वापस वापस वो देखता हूँ। और आई एम ऑलवेज थैंकफुल टू यू कि आप इतना डीप में इसको सामने लेके आए हैं डॉक्यूमेंट्री की फॉर्मेट में, और इतना रिपोर्टिंग आपने इसका किया। और यस सर, कि आई एम थैंकफुल टू दिस प्लेटफॉर्म आल्सो कि आप आज यहाँ पे आए और मुझे बात करने का मौका मिला। थैंक यू सो मच सर।
थैंक यू।
Yeah, thank you, Mahesh. Yeah, just to extend what Mahesh spoke about the documentary, to bring the focus back on the documentary. A while ago, Sainath, you said you were embarrassed by, your role in the film, but I found the anger, the rage that you express in the film, I thought was, the most fascinating, as well as a deeply significant part of the film. To sustain that kind of rage over such a long career in reporting inequalities is something that is incredible, and that is also something so crucial in order to bring out, to create awareness about this kind of inequalities in the society. So you may be embarrassed by it, but I thought that was a very crucial and significant part of the film.
That was actually, Geeta, that was the genius of Deepa Bhatia. I am very conscious in front of a film camera. Yeah. But she was able to do it so unobtrusively
Yes.
that I forgot her presence, and therefore ended up yelling and grimacing and making faces and using a lot of cuss words and telling the finished producer to fuck off. And,
Yes.
which anyone else holding that camera and directing a unit, I would never have done. That's also part of the embarrassment. But to get me as it was in the field, that was Deepa's.
Yes, yes. Also, the poetry, one of the farmers who also writes poetry. So I thought that was also a very poignant thing, in the midst of all that sorrow, to write and then to incorporate that into the film. I thought it really lent poignancy to the film.
The first person to find him and write about him is Jaideep Hardikar, who took me to the family. It was overwhelming. And Deepa's husband or partner, who is a very talented film director and actor, Amol Gupte, who acted in Kamine as the villain.
Yes.
And
He was on TFO last year.
so Amol's reading of the poem is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And really, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's that poem is over. Amol translated it also. It's just overwhelming, that part of it.
Any other comments, questions? Others who have logged in, any? Ajanta, would you like to speak? Rajan? Okay, if there are no more questions, comments, we will conclude this session today.
Sorry, Ajanta is unmuted.
Oh, okay.
No. So one, I'm very intimidated because a kind of fangirl moment to have very, very distinguished speakers joining us. But if I can make a point that, I was reminded of the Anand Patwardhan documentary that we saw last week. And just talking in filmic terms, right? So to me, what seemed the significant kind of point of compare contrast was that this is sir has been one of the foremost intellectual covering a topic that none of us has, and I certainly have no idea of at all. But this was more a documentary about, in some ways, the middle class, the responsibility of the middle class intellectual, right? Whereas I'm just thinking of the compare contrast because some people might have logged in the last for the last session as well. Whereas the last documentary was more about the life of the lady who was the migrant worker and so on. And this is kind of Sir's passionate kind of invocation to people like us, especially as he says, academics becoming now Godi academics as well. What should our responsibility be? And in that mode, I don't even know if I have a coherent question, but how do you address a subject that, it's not always class, because we keep coming back to this, right? How do you put abstract concepts into storylines? They often become about individuals. So how does Sir think? I mean, he knows this area so much more than I. But what struck me was this is about what we should do as middle class intellectuals, how we are directly in some ways NERO'S guests. And I found that deeply moving. But also, how does Sir think, because we talk of narrative form, and in some ways those seem very abstract concepts, but they should not be. And I wonder if Sir has any speculations on those as well. And just as I said, I'm honored to be on the same platform.
So, Ajanta, the one thing that, speaking of storylines, the one thing in rural India where there is no scarcity or shortage is stories. Powerful storylines. I keep telling my students, You don't have to look for stories in rural India. They kick you in the face. Yeah. So that you want to do the stories, they're there. They're there to be told. About academics, let me see. One thing I should tell you, say, when I was in JNU in the late 70s, most of our contemporaries, I did my MA and I was doing my MPhil PhD when I quit to become a journalist. Almost everybody I knew who was doing a PhD was doing it on subjects related to land reform, poverty. Yeah, it was enormous. It was one way or the other about marginalized people. All the damn PhDs were about that. When I was doing, by the time from 2000 onwards, from the year late 90s to 2010, when I did the first decade of coverage of the farm crisis, many of yesterday's academics writing on these subjects and so many of the present, the subjects were about, PhDs were about microfinance institutions, better delivery mechanisms. People were doing consultancies for World Bank, IMF on such a large scale from the universities. I did not know one person who was doing that in the late 70s. I did not know a single person doing that. So it's also that the overall world has changed in that sense. India from 1991 takes a great leap forward down the neoliberal path. And that's going to, now you've come to a generation, currently in India and in the rest of the world, but I'm talking about India, more children are going to college and university than ever before. More of them are registered in universities and colleges than at any time in our history. But more and more of them are deriving their content from WhatsApp University. Yeah. So how we have to make it connect people to the realities that are around them. We have to make people. I've been teaching journalism since 86, 87. And I believe the default mode of the young generation, every young generation, I believe the default mode is idealism. It's that they are socialized out of it. They are socialized into losing that idealism, which they come, like the dilemma that Mahesh was telling you about. Why he came to become a media person. Why idealism drove him there. The most cynical people I know in the media began as idealists. My more recent book on the freedom struggle, on the ordinary people who made the struggle, you'll find that I've presented a talk on this in 45, 46 universities and colleges in this country. And I have a discussion with the young. And there has been a complete erasure of the history. When I talk to them about what British colonialism did, how many millions died, there are kids breaking down in tears and crying in the audience, saying we never knew that. Then I tell them, some of you are so young, you might even have great-grandparents alive. I want you to go back and talk to your grandparents and great-grandparents and tell me and ask them about the freedom struggle. I've had 200 mails since then of them telling me, we spoke to my nana, my nani, this is what she said. It's horrible. She said everything that you said differently, but she said it about the same things. You've had a generation robbed of its history, who think there is no option other than the market route, than the neoliberal world. And they're thinking that at the precise moment that neoliberal globalization is collapsing. How do we show them that? That is the challenge. How do we make them ask those questions? Or how do we pose those questions to them and let them fight with it? That's what I would do.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments?
Geeta, I was just wondering if Sainath could tell us a little bit about the reach, the audience for the film. I mean, how has the response been to the film? Are there, more people who've been, like, for instance, he was talking about his articles, his writing, which has had such a tremendous impact. What about this film, and what about the audience for this film? How was it envisaged? If he could talk a little bit about that.
A lot of people who come up, who are journalists, come up and tell me that two things made them journalists. One was Everybody Loves a Good Drought, and the other is Nero's Guest. A hell of a lot of them have told me Nero's Guest changed their lives. As I said again, the credit is to Deepa. But a lot now, some years ago, I mean, even 4 years, 5 years ago, a student of mine who she did with a few others, they estimated that it was the most watched documentary for film clubs in universities. I know that Jadavpur University Film Club screened it 7 times in 1 year. That is astonishing to me. I can't believe that anyone wants to watch, me ranting and raving 7 times in a year. But it's every month I still get requests, like the one that brought me here today. I get requests for permission to screen the film. And I've taken sort of, so to speak, oral power of attorney from Deepa and say, okay, just go ahead and screen it, but please give her the credit and please inform her and me when it is screened and if you can tell us something about the impact. I have tons of feedback on, that's apart from all the film festivals it's been to and awards it's won and all of that, right? Including at MAMI, MFI, Spain, Barcelona, elsewhere. So it's had, another thing, there is one academic in the US who specializes, I'm just trying to see if I can pull out the book for you here. He is in the University of North Carolina, and watching human rights films. He is considered to be the top authority on films on human rights, Mark Gibney. He has written the great 101 best films. He has divided it into 2 parts, 50 feature films and 51 documentaries. In his overall list, in the latter, he ranks Nero's Guest as number 2 in the world of human rights documentaries and films. So it's had that kind of, and all sorts of people come and talk to me about it. I got people writing to me from Italy, thanking me for showing that it was not Nero who was a madman, but what about the complicity of his guests? So it's really been, it stuns me that that thing had so much power. I cannot tell you, I mean, I have not given a talk since then where someone has not told me about, I saw Nero's Guest. That's why I came to listen to you today.
That's fantastic. Any more questions, comments? Okay, we will conclude this session now. And with deep gratitude to P. Sainath and Devparna Roy for making this session so fascinating. And thank you all for logging in, for your comments, for your questions. Thank you very much. Good night and have a nice Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Good
Thank
night,
you so
sir.
much, sir. Thank
Thank
you very
you
much,
making
Devparna.
time.
Thank
Really.
you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
ma'am.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.